Welcome back to the Recruiting Technology Podcast. I'm Jason Roberts. We don't have Andrew here, but we have special guest, friend and colleague from Cielo, Felix Wetzel here. And welcome, Felix.
Thank you, Jason. I'm excited to be at your podcast.
Yeah, I'm very excited about this. It's the first time I've done two of these back-to-back in a very long time. We just released one last week, and it was the first one in 2 years. So I'm feeling like I'm on a roll here. That's feeling pretty good.
And I have to say, the last one with Andrew was fantastic. I listened to it and I really thought it was good because it was a very, it was practitioners talking about the whole Workday versus Mobley and the impact and what it really means in the real world instead of having purists or scaremongers talk about it. And I thought that was very, very helpful.
Yeah, we try to give that perspective on here. But you, Felix, have written a manifesto, and not a lot of people write manifestos, but you wrote the Recruitment Renaissance Manifesto, and I thought that was worth talking about. So tell us what this thing was all about.
Well, let me tell you how it started. So in a way, because of the whole AI and agentic Gen AI, there's a lot of talk in our industry and on LinkedIn about agentic, and a lot of people make a lot of claims. And it really got under my skin, and I thought, come on, we need to write something real about it instead of letting just people talk about it. I've actually never done any Gen AI work, right? And you and I, we've been obviously working over the last 2 years really in the trenches and seeing what works and what doesn't work.
Yeah.
And I started writing this Recruitment Manifesto, and what started out as a small LinkedIn post suddenly has like 16 theses. And it's ultimately based on, I guess, the two of us and Cielo's experience in having spent decades in this industry, and being really focused on Gen AI and saying what's actually working, what isn't working. And the main point that I'm making is we have a broken process, and AI won't fix it. We need to reimagine it. And ultimately, we're in a crossroad as an industry. We can either go one way where we automate everything, all of the recruiters, and we have more industrialization, we have more process, more bureaucracy. It's worse for the candidates. It's worse for the hiring managers and recruiters. Will be obsolete. Or we have the courage to reimagining it and saying, okay, how do we use AI to, merge the human expertise with AI and make it really more human, right?
Right. So, and that's sort of where we ultimately landed, right? So the things that we're building are the AI empowered recruiters.
Exactly.
And that's the term that we've been going with, where anything that we've been building lately has been about how do we multiply the efforts of a recruiter? How do you, even little things that you do every day, like you write up a candidate when you send that candidate over to the manager. Well, what if AI did a full write up and pros and cons and recommended questions? And it's all things that you would normally do, and you can edit if you want, but it's just so much better. And you don't have to spend all the time when you get AI to give you the starting point, at least, right?
Absolutely. And I think it will also be recruitment goes, I know we talked about the sentence before, the future has an ancient heart, but recruitment goes full circle back and saying when recruiters were really consultative and they really were equal partners with hiring managers and spent time with candidates, and they had real great networks. It wasn't just about processing stuff. It was about building connections, meaningful connections between all of those different parts. And I think we can go back to this and make it even better than it ever was, right?
One of the problems that we have is that the volume of information that comes to recruiters often makes it impossible for them to make it a personal experience for people. So they have all these candidates coming their way. And if they want to reply to a candidate, if they do a personalized response to each candidate, that's unsustainable. It's just too much typing, right? But with technology available, you can write a personalized response automatically using Gen AI. So it feels like a better experience. The recruiter, then all they have to do is edit. So they edit tone of voice and the feel of the thing. And the automation makes the process more human somehow.
Yes. Yeah. This, I think it's an irony that our most advanced technology will make us more human and will create a better human connection.
Yeah. So there's this cartoon that I keep seeing where on one side, it's a guy that is like, hey, what are you doing? I'm using AI to write this email really nice. So it looks like I spent a lot of time on it. And on the other side, it's a person getting an email. Hey, I'm using AI to read this email in a summary so I don't have to read the whole thing. So like AI writing on both sides is wild to me.
Well, I think the future will be absolutely wild,
Yeah.
right? When you have the candidate's agent talk with a hiring manager agent before
Well,
they even release information where the actual human talks to each other. But
well, that's exactly where I think this goes though. The future has an ancient heart. That quote is perfect because back in the day, people even still today will say, "Hey, I need to find a new job. I'm looking for a job. I got laid off, something of that nature." And then, "Do you know any good recruiters that can help me?" And people still think of it this way, like this recruiter is going to go and help me find a job. That's never existed, by the way. That might work if you're at a very niche role or
Mhm.
maybe for executive search, but for most people, recruiters don't work for you. Recruiters work for the company. They work for an agency. They get a fee for filling a job. You're not paying them. You're not their primary customer. So it's never actually worked the way that people perceived it working. But I think we're going to be in a place where candidates can have their own agents. They thought that recruiters were going to be the agent working for them on their behalf, representing them into all these different companies. And now with technology, I do believe that recruiters will have their agents. They will have the digital version of that that's their representative and putting their information forward to a bunch of different companies.
yeah, and it's kind of interesting, right? That recruiters made candidates feel that they worked for them. That's how
Oh
good
yeah.
they were. That's how much consideration, personalization they put into it. But
Oh
you're
yeah.
absolutely right. And I guess the other interesting part of this, what I'm always thinking is that, when you write a book, even when you self-publish it, you put it onto Amazon, you get a lot of percentages for royalties.
Yeah.
Shouldn't a candidate get royalties as well when their data is being used?
Oh yeah. That's interesting.
So
Well, sort of.
it's linked to your AI, your concept of having an individual agent of every candidate, right? So you
Yeah.
use my data in certain things and you recruiter earn some money based on my data being included. Shouldn't I get a cut because you're using my data? And I know you could say, and I guess that's what you wanted to say with Soldo. I kind of get it when I get a job or a gig,
Yeah.
but you might put 10 people forward and only one gets a
Well,
job.
there's an exchange that happens. Like people get really onerous about their data now. And they're like, oh, well, you're just going to use my data for some nefarious task, or I'm super surprised that Facebook is selling my data or that LinkedIn is selling my data. You have a service that's completely for free that you spend
Yes.
hours and hours and hours on this service. And you're surprised that the ad that's pushed to you is based on the data that you've been putting into the system for hours and hours every day. That's a surprise to you. You are
Yeah.
you are selling
Yeah.
yourself. What's
Yeah.
happening is the currency that you're using to pay for that service is yourself. You are being bought and sold every day. Whenever someone is bidding for an ad on Facebook, they're buying you and your attention. So the idea that people are surprised, I don't know. I think the way that you get compensated is you get the job, you get to use the application for free. And don't get me wrong, I would I would ask for it and I would pay for it. If I could have ad-free Facebook, ad-free everything. I pay for ad-free TV on all the channels now, but I would pay money to do ad-free, but I can't. So
Yes.
I would still rather have the service than not have the service. So I pay for that with my information.
So slightly different perspective, but maybe on the same topic. If you think about, when we use more AI and more automation, I can imagine that some clients will say, well, now you're using AI and automation, therefore it should get cheaper.
Hmm.
Therefore, let's reduce, because you don't need as many man hours, let's reduce this down. But
Yeah.
it's the same argument, right? Where in a way you could say, well, we've put a lot of R&D investment in there. It costs us still a lot of time. And
Yeah.
more importantly, we might deliver something faster, better, higher
Right.
quality. So I find that an interesting dynamic at the moment that seems to be developing in the market.
It's true. It's almost like pharmaceutical companies, right? For the first little bit, that drug is very expensive. If you're an early adopter of
Mhm.
that medication and you're paying the name brand price before it becomes generic, I don't remember how long it takes, but it's not very long in the US. Then you pay a much higher price for that medication. And over time, it gets less and less expensive and you get to have the generics and you get the benefit of the thing. So, and I think we also get better at creating and manufacturing the things. We get more efficient, so
Yeah.
the costs go down, all those things happen. But you have to pay for the R&D up front. That's actually how they justify it, is that those companies are paying for the R&D up front. We had a company come to us and they wanted to do voice-based candidate screening, like AI screens, right? And we had one that we really liked, but this other company, they gave us a price point that was literally double what we pay our current team. That we have a really good team that sits offshore, and it was literally double the cost per screen of
Yeah.
having an offshore person do it. And I said, I pulled them up and I said, we don't need to talk anymore. I'm done. As long as this costs me more money, it's not a conversation worth having. And I gave a heads up early on to our COO, my boss, that was something we would have to consider. Like, what are the costs of these technologies? Because things like voice and video and those things, the tokens for that, OpenAI is charging you a lot more for those services than they necessarily charge for some of the other things. Like, I think to do a screen, you would have to use like 11 Labs or one of the really solid voice
Yeah.
systems. And that's literally double. They charge you the LLM cost. They pass that. That's a pass through. The LLM cost is a pass through to you. And then you pay a fee to them per minute on top of that. So if you're going to do a phone screen, you're paying a per minute phone screen fee to them that ultimately happens. So yeah, that gets expensive. So if you have a low cost human solution right now, it probably makes more sense to keep the low cost human solution,
Yes,
right?
absolutely. I think it's fascinating how there's so many different components to consider.
Yeah, it
Yeah.
really is. I actually think that company was doing it wrong. So Purplefish, who we talked to, they have a different approach so they're not hitting the language LLM as every time. They're not
Okay.
hitting the expensive tokens. They're hitting the transcript tokens, and they're doing the transcription in near real time. So it's really fast to move the transcripts. And because of however they're doing it, I don't know all the technical stuff. However they're doing it, they're able to do it at a much more reasonable price that actually saves us some money. But yeah, it was fascinating to see how that breaks down.
But I think it's a lot of people who are building these solutions, especially, in the US or in Europe, have no appreciation of what a call actually costs if you outsource it,
Oh yeah.
if you offshore it. Therefore, they
Yeah.
think $3 for a call is relatively cheap, or they think, well, they might have done some kind of market research when they say, oh, it costs $3 to do it somewhere in an offshore sales solution. Therefore, we put $3 in as well. But they don't. I think we can see that with loads of providers, right? Any new provider that comes into HR tech doesn't really necessarily understand all of the intricacies that are linked to it. And
Yeah.
that it's not just that there's hidden costs and additional costs that are linked to every single point solution that we bring in.
That's right. Even with the human solutions, there's extra little things. There's extra little costs that you have to consider. Like, somebody's got to pay for the ticketing system where you're passing information back and forth, and somebody's got to pay for. But those things are so ubiquitous now that it sort of just gets absorbed in and becomes a part of the overall stack. I've been looking at this like outsourcing. So I've been saying that the move to automate with AI is a lot like the move to outsource was back in the day.
Yeah.
And I remember when we had, well, outsourcing, I should say more specifically offshoring. When we moved to offshore to low cost centers way back, we had the exact same conversations. All the same conversations took place. What does it cost to hand off to that team? Is there going to be rework time? Is there, and all the same sorts of things. The other thing that you had mentioned was, we had these messy processes, and AI is not going to fix the messy processes.
Yes.
That was the same principle for offshoring, right? You had to have a clean, buttoned up process that could be turned into SOPs, standard operating procedures, before you could hand off to an offshore team eventually.
Yeah.
And that's exactly how it is with AI. Now, the offshore teams, some of the offshore teams, I think that it still makes more sense to use those. The other problem is, how do candidates feel about interacting with machines versus those humans?
And I think, I mean, we've built it now in Seattle where we've changed what the source does, and that we kind of,
Yeah.
the contact with a candidate happens actually much earlier in the process than waiting until they've applied, and we can see this. And it also reminds me of one of the first conversations we had when we started working together was you explaining to me that you did some tests in a previous company where candidates wanted to speak really early on and then just after they applied again. And these were the two data points that you had where you took them out. And in a way, that's what we're doing again, right?
Yeah.
We're making it earlier and making the human interaction earlier, and then in the onboarding process again.
I think that's right. So what Felix is talking about, I've been experimenting with automating parts or types of recruiting processes for 7 years now. We'll call it maybe 8. And what we learned early on is your no-show rate skyrocketed if it was fully automated. It's been possible to fully automate this thing for 8, maybe even 10 years, but no-show rates skyrocket. What happens is people want to do what they say they're going to do. There's a sociological pressure to be a person of your word, right? And to follow through on things. But people don't think it counts if they told a machine they would do it instead of telling a human they would do it. So talking to a human and being grounded in that human contact is important for the rest of the process to work. Otherwise, your drop-off rates become unmanageable. Drop-off rates are bad at the interview stage, or even especially at the start stage, because you have so much more volume you need at the top of your funnel that the ads and the activity required to drive that much more volume to make up for the drop-off isn't worth it. Like, it's very, very expensive. So it makes more sense to insert small points of human touch so that you reduce that drop-off rate in the funnel itself.
Yeah, I can see that. And I had a similar experience when I was the role before Seattle, when I worked for a company hiring or we needed to hire domiciliary care. So we at the same point, we needed to get them really early on. And then the second point was also, and human needed to reconfirm to them which shifts they can actually work.
Yeah.
Because there was a lot where they kind of choose something in the automated fashion. Yeah, I can work all of these shifts. But then when a human says, can you really work Sundays?
Yeah.
And these are the real shifts that you need to work. Can you really do them? And you got a very different answer. But it helped, right? We needed to do this, even though we lost some people there. But it's better than bringing people, training them up, getting them into the branch, and then, I can only work Monday to Friday, while my kids are at school.
That's right. They get way more serious about it. Like, it becomes real. Like, when you're first applying for the job, you're like, I don't want to say anything that would kick me out of the process.
Yeah.
And then when you're getting closer, it's like, oh, well, I really don't want to miss Sunday roast every week. So we'll say no. I'm not able to do that.
And I think this is the interesting thing, right? When we always talk in recruitment about people, process, and technology, it's the first two that you need to figure out before you think about the technology. It doesn't matter if it's an AI, if it's an ATS, if you outsource it. If you don't know what the roles are in the process that you want to build, there are no silver bullets.
What we did with the Source and Engage product, though, like our automated sourcing solution, when we applied that to our sourcing team, I think we went tech first because the tech was so good. It was so automated.
Yeah.
And so that was more about the process, because what you and the team did was you stripped out a lot of the nonsense, like the places where it didn't make sense for people to have interactions. You flipped some of the other interactions so that candidates got more engaged before they were giving us a bunch of their information. So that was good. And you increased the response rate because you leaned into what the candidate wanted a little bit more. And that worked so much better that we were like, okay, we're going to wrap our sourcing team around that. And that's how we ended up with our current sourcing model.
Yes.
Yeah.
And but it needed the adjustment to the roles and the process.
Yeah.
It wouldn't have worked.
It's funny how symbiotic that relationship ultimately became, right? Like
Yes.
we were like, okay, we're going to shift our process to lean into this technology fully. And the way that people do work is a completely different thing than it was before. We had to retrain the entire team on how to do things. And then as a result of that, we were like, there's some things that don't quite work for us. So then we started informing the technology.
Yeah.
And we're like, now that this is in place, we're informing the technology. And then I think we just hit a cycle where there was yet another technology shift where we said, okay, let's adjust the process yet again. Right. So we're adjusting our process now one more time because the technology is able to do something that we weren't able to do before. So that's been pretty cool.
Yeah. And I like this. I think it's one of the coolest things over the last 2 years or 3 years.
Right.
And you need to kind of saying how this all is fluid, but how we all work together and how sometimes it's the technology, sometimes it's the process. And like you said, and now, we've done this. We have the sourcing part not figured out, but a little somewhat improved. How can we improve it how can we improve the recruiters and the slates that we send to hiring managers and, what has been built there and doesn't yet have an official name, right? But it's great. And, the improvements that we see already, just after a couple of weeks already, like, again, what is it, 10, 15% improvement in recruiter time, cost of hire being down. It's just, and the cool thing for me that I like better, recruiters like it better, hiring managers preferred, and candidates preferred. So it's not just the tech, but all of the people that it touches think this is much easier, much, much better.
Yeah. It's been fun. It's been really fun. My favorite one is the 5x productivity on a sourcer. That's just wild to me. So sourcers are delivering 5 times as many qualified, interested, available applicants. That's pretty good.
I know. And the wild thing is when you kind of say this beforehand, people go like, yeah, you're crazy. It's never going to happen. And now we actually see it in the data and we can see it on a day-to-day basis. And then you go, and I think, and this is just the beginning phase, right? AI, it's like,
I was on another podcast a little while back and he asked what my favorite new technology is. And I was like, this is self-serving, but it really is this thing because I've never had results this measurable before. Like it was so good. So anyway, well, Felix, thank you for joining the Recruiting Technology Podcast. This has been fun. We'll have to do this again. Felix will be a more frequent guest on here, I believe. And this is great.
Yeah, many thanks. I really enjoyed it.
Awesome. Thank you for joining us for the Recruiting Technology Podcast. Thanks to our special guest, Felix Wetzel, for joining us this week. And remember to follow, subscribe, wherever you happen to be watching. Until next time, keep making cool stuff.